Hi and then welcome to my book corner. Today is the wrap-up video for November, a little bit late this month, I apologise about that. But as always, we're going to start by talking about my reading stats for the month before going over each book individually. If you like this video, I would really appreciate a thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed already but you enjoy this video, please consider subscribing as well. Now with all that out of the way, let's just dive straight in. Let's begin with the statistics. As always, this is courtesy of Storygraph. I completed 11 books this month. Now, one of those books was partially read from the month before, but I finished it this month. Total reading of 2,086 pages, 13.8 hours of audiobook with an average rating of 3.86. The highest ratings for the month were 4.5 stars. For Starbound, and our comeback tour is Slaying Monsters. A couple of 4.25s in there as well. And our lowest score for the month was a 2.25 star read. 5 of the books were horror, 4 were fantasy, 3 were sci-fi, 2 were mystery, and 4 of the books had LGBTQIA plus representation. We had 1 non-fiction book and 10 fiction books. 55% were digital reads this month, 18% print and 27% audio. And as you can see, my reading progress was absolutely everywhere for this month. So that's the overview of the month, but let's jump now into the individual books. The month began with me finishing off Cutting Your Teeth, Book 1 of Cursed Corpses by Caylan Macrae, and this was narrated by Richard Pendragon. And this was a lot of fun. The main character of Ezra is running away from his past and his family and bumps into a person called Caylan who turns out to be a vampire and ends up turning him and is determined to make sure that Ezra is safe. Unfortunately, Ezra cannot escape the evils of his past life and a family curse that follows him. This swings from quite sweet to absolutely horrifying in places. There's some really squeaky imagery going on here at times. Specifically, there's one scene where Ezra gets his first set of vampire teeth and it forces his old teeth out. That's a little bit gruesome the way that happens. There's some interesting dives into lore as well here in terms of monsters and supernatural creatures. And the relationship between Ezra and Caylan is also well done, with Caylan having some secret motives behind the initial meeting, and overall this was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to book 2 when it comes out. I gave this 4.25 stars out of 5. It's also worth mentioning that this came in at 11.5 hours and recently won Best Narration at the Indie Ink Awards. Following on from that, we have Steen by Steve Russell. This is just under 300 pages long and follows a demon hunter that lives in London, originally from Canada, and their pet capuchin monkey, who is actually the angel Raphael. Steen is down on their luck, struggling to make ends meet, slightly resentful in some ways of the world in general. However, following a tip-off from their ex, they end up investigating a number of what initially seems to be unconnected events throughout London and then the world. A gradual uncovering of the actual threat, a ticking time bomb element, and a genuine threat with a very clever and smart solution at the end. Steen themselves feels like a more dour version of Constantine, which, as Constantine is one of my favourite comic book characters, I'm all here for this. Although they're not an especially likeable character, even though I would say they probably are a relatively good person. Overall, this was a lot of fun. This was one of my Your Paper Quest books. I rated this at 3.75 stars out of 5. Moving on to a novella next. This is Stone of Shadows by Camilla Vavruch. And this was one of my purchases in my last book called Before the Read What You Own challenge. Comes in at 123 pages long. I gave this 4 stars out of 5. This was just a lot of fun. Will is a poor kid working as a farmhand, struggling to make ends meet to keep his family fed, and has a not obvious attraction and rivalry with the son of the landowner, Tristan Arrington. When a dragon attacks for reasons Will doesn't understand, he saves Tristan's life and is snatched himself by the dragon, but discovers a magical stone that allows him to sneak back to town. And over time, he starts to investigate more and find out some of the true struggles that Tristan themselves are going through. This is a romance with low heat. It's actually kind of sweet, and I also do like how sparky that Will is as a character. This is part of a bigger world and also is a series of novellas, and I'm looking forward to picking up the rest of them once the Read What You Own challenge concludes. One of my ARC reads is up next, and I received this book for free through Book Sirens. This is our comeback tour is Slaying Monsters, Book 1 in the Boy Bands and Dragons series by Kim Smuga-Otto. I do have a full review for this one up on the channel. I shall link that above. And I think this might be my favourite book of the month. This was my first ever literary RPG, so I don't know how good an example it is of the genre. But this did a very good job of making encounters and interactions within the world feel very similar to a video game equivalent in terms of some of the frustrations you sometimes get with writing and general setup of things, especially when it comes to quests. The band's dynamic with each other and the world they're thrust into is really interesting as well, and Kyle is probably the perfect character to introduce this series with, as they are the only one out of the group that is actually familiar with the video game that this is set in and that they're transported into. There's some good character growth in here, some solid if mildly chaotic and failure prone action scenes. Overall, this was just a lot of fun. It came in at 473 pages, and I gave this 4.5 stars out of 5. Again, this was a book I received for free through Book Sirens just for full disclosure reasons, and if you want to know my more in-depth thoughts on this one, please check my review out. Moving from that to more serious fare, we have the indie horror novel The Erstwhile Tyler Kyle by Hugh Westenra. It took me a little bit of time to get a handle of this because this felt initially like it had too many spinning plates in terms of what it was trying to juggle, but I will say that by the end of the book it pulled everything together perfectly. We're following the titular Tyler Kyle, a failed Hollywood actor who is a YouTuber who hunts cryptids and is very much the not believing sort of the duo. After being sent a video of their mother who ran away many years ago, Tyler decides to investigate an island in a remote part of Canada, and you have all sorts that start to be revealed here. From its past as a gay conversion camp, to Tyler's own struggles with her attraction to their best friend, as well as some questions around potentially supernatural sightings around the island, and the thought that there is a stalker who has lured them here. There is a lot going on here, and it does a really good job of actually pulling it all together in the last third. There is some rather graphic violence in here. There is a little bit of spice as well, which took me a teeny bit by surprise. But overall, I enjoyed this quite a lot. It came in at 450 pages. I gave this 4.25 stars. Another one of my Book Sirens books that I received for free. This is Decrepit Ritual by Valkyrie Loughcrewe. I really wanted to like this more than I did, and there's a number of things that kind of threw me with this one. The premise is that the titular character, whose name we do not know, has taken themselves away to a remote cabin in the woods in the Norwegian wilderness to put an end to their life. Whilst hopped up on medication and alcohol, they discover a old VHS tape which they watch whilst dealing with all their thoughts. And this VHS tape is very much a 70s, 80s gory horror B-movie. There is some outstanding descriptive work in here. Some of the monsters that are described are true nightmare fuel. And there is a lot of gore. I'm not sure why the gore didn't really affect me as much. It might be because I've become more accustomed to it because of reading more extreme horror. I'm not sure. The thing that really got in the way of this for me was the writing as it's written from second person. And I ended up getting very lost on whether the character was actually in the movie or just watching the movie, or you were being told what the movie character was doing. Because of the state of mind of the main character, it left me feeling really disorientated throughout and I couldn't latch on properly. That being said, I think this is a solid horror. I gave it 3.25 stars just because the writing wasn't for me, but I can see this really being to the taste of some people. The third and final of my Book Sirens books is Saturday Fright at the Movies by Amanda Cecelia Lang. This is a collection of 13 short stories, and I don't really do well with short stories normally. But this was a lot of fun, a true homage to 80s and 90s horror. Like any short story collection, some stories worked better for me than others. The two highlights were Medusa, made with the heads of men, which was told from a really interesting perspective of news articles, interviews, narrated CCTV footage rather than actual normal character interaction. That was absolutely stellar. And also the 80s schlock that was Unicorns from Galaxy 13 was just amazing. Overall, this averaged out at 4 stars, but there's some real gems in this one. And I would say if you're a fan of 80s or 90s horror, you should absolutely give this one a check out. Whilst that last book was a horror, I found this one more horrifying. We have some erotica. This is Ice Planet Barbarians by Ruby Dixon, narrated by Holly Jackson and Mason Lloyd. The audiobook comes in at 5 hours and 51 minutes, and my issue with this book is entirely part 1. During part 1, our main character is one of a number of women who is abducted by aliens, presumably to be sold on a slave trade elsewhere, possibly as pleasure slaves, judging by the way that they are treated. During the first part, we have severe sexual assault against some of the women in this story. After something goes wrong, the ship crashes on an icy planet, and the main character goes out to try and find something. What they find is a big hulking blue-skinned barbarian who doesn't understand the meaning of the word consent, something that is lessened in terms of impact by the severe SA we've already had up to this point, almost making it seem acceptable. It is not. You have the miscommunication trope going on here as they speak different languages. But the first part of this book really did leave a nasty taste in the mouth. This would have sat better if after the scenes on the alien spaceship, the introduction of the romanceable alien was done without SA and lack of consent. That would have sat better and would have probably got this a higher score overall, as the things that happened on that ship are unfortunately things that did happen during the slave trade in real life. The book is solidly written. There's some decently written spice scenes as well, but that first part just spoiled my enjoyment for the entire book. So overall, this gets a 2.25 stars out of 5, simply because of what happened in part 1. Continuing with the final frontier, we have book 3 of the Odyssey Earth series, Starbound by Rex Burke. And this fetches the trilogy to a natural conclusion, but still manages to leave me wanting more from this universe. It continues to have good humour like the rest of the series. The friendships develop as well really, really well. I particularly like Reeves and Jordan, as the AI Reeves spends most of his time sort of needling Jordan for basically being a less advanced form of ape compared to all the people around them. All the teenagers also at this point have developed very, very clear personalities and roles within their social structure, and this is then challenged when new people are introduced to it. You have billionaires bad, which is always something that I like to see, as the schemes of the founder of the expedition finally come to light. And you have Captain Juno and Major Tom, who I think are an absolutely adorable couple at the end, and I really like their interplay as well. I also like the fact that this does not feel the need to answer all the questions that it raises. There's still a load of mystery here around the planets that they've landed on and the various life forms and creatures that they've discovered. And there's certainly scope to spend more time within this universe. I gave this 4.5 stars out of 5, and this was 354 pages long. The next one is a re-listen. This is Note to Self by Franta. Comes in at slightly over 3.5 hours long and is actually narrated by Connor themselves. And this is kind of a collection of self-made poetry and also kind of letters to their earlier self, going over a number of Connor's difficulties growing up, coming out, and also dealing with the limelight that came from becoming a very, very popular YouTuber. This documents Connor's struggles with anxiety, depression, and self-love, as well as acceptance, and is generally a really interesting listen. This is a re-listen, and this didn't have the same impact on me this time round as it did when I first listened to it, which does kind of show that you can find books at certain points in your life that fit better than others. It was still a really interesting listen though, and I gave this a 3.5 stars out of 5 this time around. Finally, we have another book from my Your Paper Quest book subscription, although I have 2 copies of this because this came in my book box about 4 days after I did a book haul and picked the ebook version of this up. Duckett and Dyer, Dicks for Hire by G.M. Nair. This is book 1 in a trilogy, so more books for me to get to later on. Comes in at 302 pages long, and I gave this a 4.25 stars out of 5. Where this really shines is in the interactions between Duckett and Dyer. Duckett is going out, working a dead-end job, sort of feeling a bit not great about life, whereas Dyer is very much a stay-at-home slacker who seems to achieve nothing. There's some cracking set pieces in here, but this then descends into absolute sci-fi barminess with multiverses, spatial and time travel, and some really peculiar imagery, some of which you can see on the cover. The more you look at the cover, the more you'll see, and it'll set your imagination off. To give you an idea about the humour of this book, you have a little piece on the back that says, see what people, inverted commas, are saying, inverted commas, about Duckett and Dyer, Dicks for Hire, and these are a series of made-up quotes. Such testimony as a long-written or printed literary composition from Webster's Dictionary definition of book. Duckett and Dyer has a tremendous energy to it. When released, it will warm your body and perhaps even your soul. For the International Journal of Burning Things in a Fireplace. Duckett and Dyer is the funniest thing I've ever read from a woman who's never read anything before. I can't stop laughing by a victim of Papuan laughing sickness, deceased. And who are you? How did you get into my office? From name redacted. If asked about this book, probably. A lot of fun. I absolutely love the interaction between the 2 main characters, and I think this is well worth you giving a check out. So there we go. That is my reading for November of 2024. An interesting varied month with some highs and some lows. That just leaves us with 1 month left of the year. I'm not quite sure how we're already in December, but there we go. So what I would like to know from you amazing people out there is, what are you looking to potentially read during December? And if you could receive 1 book as a present, what would it be? Thank you for watching and listening. I will catch you all very, very soon.